Tom Reynolds was a man who prided himself on his success. His law firm provided a comfortable living, his suburban house was spacious and well-kept, and he had built a life that many envied. But despite all the outward signs of a happy marriage, something was deeply wrong. His wife, Laura, had been acting strangely for months, distant, distracted, and often lost in thought. The little signs began to add up, and Tom, ever the pragmatist, started to wonder, was his wife planning to leave him? It started with small things, subtle shifts in their routine. Laura would spend longer hours at the gym. She'd claimed to have book club meetings he'd never heard about before. Suddenly, she was taking weekend trips with friends, trips he wasn't invited to. Tom was used to her being busy. She had her own successful career, after all. But this felt different. Something was off. He noticed she was more secretive with her phone, her once affectionate demeanor now seemed forced, and their conversations grew terse and shallow. One evening, after an argument about something trivial, Laura snapped. "You wouldn't understand," she said, her eyes sharp with frustration. "You're always so busy." "I need space." The words stung. Tom had always been dedicated to his work, but he also thought he was dedicated to their life together. That night, something clicked. He couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut anymore. Maybe she was planning something. Maybe she had already made up her mind to leave. And that's when the thought occurred to him, what if I get ahead of her? Tom had seen enough divorces in his career to know how they worked. He knew that often, when one spouse suspects a breakup is coming, they begin moving assets, hiding money, or making secret preparations. Tom wasn't naive. If Laura was planning to take him for half of everything he'd worked so hard for, he would make sure she didn't catch him by surprise. He wouldn't be a victim in his own story. So, Tom started taking action. He didn't tell anyone, not even his closest friends. This was a mission he had to undertake alone. He began to move their assets, little by little, with meticulous care. First, he transferred money from their joint accounts into his personal savings, setting up few accounts that were solely in his name. Then, he sold a few investments he knew could be liquidated quickly, converting them to cash before she could get a whiff of what was happening. A couple of rare art pieces he had collected over the years were sold to a trusted dealer, and the proceeds went straight into a private account overseas, far from her reach. He also moved key documents, things like property deeds, business ownership papers, and other important assets into a new safe deposit box that only he could access. He was careful, methodical, and patient. This wasn't about greed or revenge. It was about survival. It was about being prepared. If she was going to make a move, Tom was going to be ready. He was building a fortress around his life's work, brick by silent brick. 2 weeks later, the other shoe dropped. He came home from a long day at the office to find Laura sitting at the kitchen table, looking unusually calm. Her eyes, which once held such warmth, now had a coldness that made Tom's gut tighten. This was it. "I've been thinking," she began, folding her hands in front of her. "And I think it's time we talk." Tom's heart raced, but his face remained a mask of composure. He had been waiting for this moment, but hearing the words out loud still made it feel brutally real. He took a deep breath and sat down across from her, the polished wood of the table feeling like a battlefield between them. "I think we need to get a divorce, Tom," Laura said, her voice steady but distant. "I've tried to make this work, but I've realized that we're just not the same anymore. I've been seeing someone else." Tom's pulse quickened at the confession, a hot flash of anger and betrayal mixing with a cold sense of vindication. But he stayed calm, keeping his emotions locked down tight. "I see," Laura continued, seemingly detached, as if reading from a script. "I've already talked to a lawyer. We can split everything fairly, and I'll take what's mine, of course. I've already started the process." Tom didn't flinch. He knew she had probably been planning this for months. But what Laura didn't know was that Tom had been one step ahead of her the entire time. The assets she thought were hers to take were not as easily accessible as she believed. "I understand," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But before you make any decisions, you might want to take a look at something." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folder. He placed it on the table between them. Laura eyed it warily. "What's that?" she asked, her tone already defensive. Tom slid the folder over to her. "It's a summary of our assets, Laura. You might want to take a look, because things aren't exactly as you think." Laura's eyes narrowed as she opened the folder. Her gaze flicked over the document, and a look of confusion slowly crept across her face as she saw the numbers and details. The large balances she expected to see were gone. The investment portfolios were empty. "Where's the joint account? The savings?" she asked, her voice starting to rise with panic. "What is this?" "They're not there anymore," Tom said evenly. "I moved them. I've been making sure everything is protected. You know, just in case things went south." Laura's face turned white, the color draining from her cheeks as the reality of his words hit her. "What are you talking about? You can't just do that." "That's our money." "Actually, I can," Tom said calmly. "You're entitled to half of what's here, but right now, you don't have access to it all. You see, I've made sure everything's secure. The investments, the properties, they're not in your name anymore. I've made legal moves to ensure that if you're serious about this, it won't be as easy as you think." Laura stood up, her hands trembling with rage and disbelief. You planned this? You've been preparing for a divorce this whole time." "I didn't know what you were planning, Laura, but I suspected something was going on," Tom replied coolly. "So, I made sure that if you wanted to go down this path, you wouldn't be taking everything with you. The house, the cars, everything we worked for, those things are tied up now. I can't give you what you think you're entitled to." Not without a fight, Laura looked as if she'd been slapped. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She was speechless. After a long, heavy moment, she slumped back into her chair, staring at the folder in utter disbelief. The confident, controlled woman who had walked in to end a marriage was gone, replaced by someone who had just realized she'd been completely outmaneuvered. Tom stood up and grabbed his coat. "I've got a few things to take care of. I suggest you speak to your lawyer again. Maybe they'll have some advice for you on how to proceed, but I can promise you, this won't be as easy as you thought." Tom left the house that night with a quiet, somber sense of victory. He hadn't done this out of spite, but out of self-preservation. He had seen the signs, listened to his gut, and taken decisive action before Laura could make her move. 2 weeks later, Laura came back to him, but the entire dynamic had shifted. The clean, simple divorce she had envisioned was now a complex legal battle she was not prepared for. And Tom, while not thrilled with the idea of ending his marriage, knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't be left with nothing. As the legal battle unfolded over the following months, Tom's careful planning paid off spectacularly. He wasn't just prepared for the worst, he had outsmarted her at her own game. The assets were protected, and the stakes were higher than Laura ever expected. She had come to the table expecting a swift victory, only to find the game had been rigged in his favor long before she even sat down. In the end, Tom didn't just walk away with what was rightfully his, he walked away with the satisfaction of knowing he'd taken control of his future when someone tried to pull the rug out from under him. And as for Laura, well, she learned a harsh lesson: never underestimate the man who's been paying attention all along. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video.